and then Zheng pulled up her phone into classic selfie stance and bumped her head gently against Archie's. "Hey," she said, and Archie felt suddenly very self-conscious, very seen, very put on the fucking spot. "Yeah? I reckon Jim and Olawande would feel lucky to know you too. I know I feel lucky right now." "As in, you wanna get lucky?" Archie threw in an eyebrow wobble. "Just for the help," Jen looked at Archie.
This week on the podcast, Gutis, aka Cheesecake 3, is back with a couple of narrations for you. This week's theme is Rarepairs. That's pairings we don't often see in fics. And she has 2 short fics that will open your world to pairings that go beyond Gentlebeard and Steddyhands. The first is not the rarest of pairs. It's a LuPete Lucius Spriggs modern AU. Hey, they're married, but maybe we need to see more fics about what these two are up to. And this one is about a down on his luck Lucius Spriggs getting help from Pete, who is a government worker. It's called Municipal by Mistercrystal. Let's have a listen.
Pete left the county building after the traditional morning meeting, plopped himself in the driver's seat of his government sedan, and rifled through his zipper binder to ensure he was stocked up on all the necessary forms and citations and brochures he might need throughout the day. Then he fired up the engine and reversed out of his assigned parking space. Well, fired up wasn't quite the right verbiage, seeing as how the electric vehicle made only the slightest whisper of a sound when it started, and then settled into a nearly silent purr. But while he cared about the environment and supported the switch to electric vehicles, he couldn't help but feel like there was an element of badassery you could only get with cranking up something with a really loud muffler that electric cars would just never beat. Pete sighed. He had a number of houses to visit and audit, the county having received complaints about them for one reason or another, so he started on the route he'd planned out at his desk, also keeping an eye out for violations as he drove. He didn't expect anything too crazy from the day. All the complaints were fairly run-of-the-mill. Grass too long, fence too high, house paint not uniformly beige enough. So the biggest danger was people being a bit irritated at having had the county called out on them. The last stop on his route was a duplex with a complaint about an unkempt yard. And yeah, when Pete pulled up, he could absolutely see why a neighbour had complained. Aside from the grass being at least a foot high and the hedges in dire need of shaping, ivy was on the brink of overtaking both halves of the duplex, and there were shrubs reaching through the front fence, preventing sidewalk accessibility. And look, Pete was all for natural landscaping, but the sidewalks really should be passable, and frankly, English ivy was about as unnatural as it came for this region. He painstakingly itemised each infraction on the form that told the resident they had 14 days to correct the issues, and went to knock on the front door, which he honestly was a little worried would fall apart under his hand. After 3 separate knocks, no one answered, and he tucked the notice between the doorknob and the frame and turned to leave. When he got to the end of the driveway, he heard a terrible sort of screech that apparently accompanied the door opening, and turned to see a man stooping to pick up the paper that had fluttered down to the ground. "Hey," Pete called. The man looked up. He was a bit taller and younger than Pete, with old-timey sideburns, a strong jawline, and eyes Pete could tell were dreamy even from 15 or 20 feet away. Pete adjusted his posture a bit, not that he expected anything, and tried to exude a friendly vibe. "We've just had some complaints about your yard here, but you've got 2 weeks to get it fixed up, so no worries. Let me know if you have any questions. I can leave you my card?" That's okay. Yeah, I'll take care of it, thanks," the man responded before quickly backing into the house. "Cool, The door slammed, and he heard the deadbolt slide home. "Pete." Kind of a bummer to be dismissed so handily, but again, he hadn't been expecting anything. He got in his car, wrote a reminder on his schedule to come back in 2 weeks, and headed back to the office for the afternoon to input his day's work in the computer record system. 14 days later, Pete pulled up to the duplex again and saw that absolutely no progress had been made on cleaning up the yard. If anything, the house just seemed that much closer to being reclaimed by nature. Pete notated all the same infractions as before, plus a new one for the mailbox being so covered in ivy he was surprised it was still in use. There had to be like a whole family of spiders or some kind of bugs living in there at this point, and he certainly wouldn't want to reach his hands in past the foliage to retrieve junk mail. He shook his head and gingerly knocked on the door. This time, the man actually answered after a second knock, looking a little worse for wear. His beard was grown out a bit now, and his shirt had a few stains on it, as if he'd not changed it in a few days. A cigarette was perched between his fingers, smoke snaking out from it to be caught in the slight breeze. "Hi," Pete began hesitantly. He wasn't sure whether the man might be about to bite his head off or break down sobbing into Pete's shoulder. "So, I'm back to check on your progress on the whole..." He gestured around himself. "Looks like you might need a bit more time, though." "Yeah, well, it's all going to grow back anyway, right? Like, you get everything in place and you think you're good, and then it all goes to shit again, so why even try?" Pete took a tiny step back, hoping to keep his head out of actual biting range. "I mean, you try your best and you work really hard, and then some asshole lunatic just throws you out on your ass just because you got dumped. Like, I have a life too, you know?" "Is this about the yard still?" Pete interjects carefully. "It sounds like you might be going through something." "No, it's not about the goddamn yard, okay? The yard would have been taken care of if my dickhead boss hadn't dumped my other dickhead boss and got me fucking fired, okay? I would still be paying for the yard if I had any fucking money to do so, alright?" He sighed and put a hand on his hip, the back of the one holding the cigarette going to rest over his eyes. "Listen, I'm sorry you're going through a tough time, but I'm just doing my job here. And not for nothing, but physical labour can be a pretty good method of getting over some things. Tire your body out, clear your mind, and you can maybe think of some ways to move on. And your yard isn't huge, so it probably wouldn't take you super long, you know." The man huffed in a way that was very nearly a sob, so Pete stepped back forward in case his shoulder was needed. "I have a thing with my lower back. I don't clean things. Plus, last time I tried to do manual labour, I literally lost a finger, so..." Pete's eyes involuntarily scanned both the man's hands and noticed his left hand was missing its index finger. He looked back up and met the man's eyes, as dreamy as he'd thought last time, large and dark green and glimmering with unshed tears. He didn't like to admit it, but Pete was a bit of a softie. He wasn't weak or lame. He just accidentally cared too much about a lot of stuff. "Well, I could, if you wanted, I could help you get it sorted out. I won't have time until this weekend, but I could bring over my mower and stuff and help you get started. Unless... do you already have, like, yard equipment?" "Ugh, no. I don't need any of that stuff." The man's cigarette had burned down to the filter and gone out, but he didn't seem to have noticed. He met Pete's eyes warily. "Why would you spend your weekend cleaning up someone else's lawn?" Pete struggled for a moment to find a good answer that wasn't just, "You're really cute," or "You seem sad and I want to help you not be," and shrugged. "I guess it's like I said, physical work just quiets your brain. Helps you forget about all the stuff you might be worrying about and reminds you you're alive. Whatever you've been through with your bosses and stuff sounds like it sucked. But you lived, you know? You gotta make the best of it now. For me, it's just like feeling bored or lonely a lot, so it's nice to get out in nature too." The man's mouth hung slightly ajar. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense," he said after a moment. I do hate to accept your offer without paying you, but I really can't afford to do that, so I guess I'll just say thank you. I'd appreciate borrowing the equipment at least." "Yeah, sure, man. Oh, and I'm Pete. I tried to introduce myself last time, but you kind of slammed the door before I could get it out." Sorry, I'm Lucius. I'd invite you in for a coffee or whatever, but frankly the inside's almost as bad as the outside right now. That's alright. I have to go finish up at the office anyway. But I'll see you this weekend, Saturday morning. Yeah, I'll text you. Oh, can I give you my number? Pete's stomach did a thrilling little flip-flop that he tried to ignore. This was him helping out someone in need, nothing more, so far. Yes, yeah, here you go. He unlocked his phone and navigated to add contact for Lucius to type his information in. Okay, I'll see you Saturday then, Pete. And thanks again. Lucius backed slowly through the door, clearly trying to show as little of the room within as possible, and did a little wave before pressing the door firmly shut and locking it. They didn't text throughout the rest of the week, so on Friday evening, Pete was getting antsy about the following day, wondering if he should write Lucius to confirm he should still come. As he was writing and deleting text after text, a new message appeared from Lucius. Still on for tomorrow? Pete fumbled to respond quickly. Yes, I can be there whenever, then cringed at his own eagerness. You mentioned 10 a.m. before? I should be up by then. Okay, cool. I'll try to get there around 10. Smooth, Pete thought to himself. Do you know what all equipment you need, or should I just bring a bunch of stuff? I guess just whatever you think we'll need. Not really the yard work type, as you've probably gathered. Gotcha. Okay, I'll see you in the morning then. He plugged his electric push mower, weed whacker and hedge trimmer into charge overnight, then packed up a variety of pruning tools in the tool chest in the bed of his truck. He even tossed in a pair of gardening gloves. He usually forewent them, but he got the feeling Lucius would be more comfortable with a barrier between his hands and the dirt. The next morning, he accidentally arrived 15 minutes early. He thought about making a loop around the block, so he didn't seem to Lucius like he was trying too hard, but he figured driving slowly past all the neighbours was more disturbing to more people than Pete just appearing as eager as he really was to see Lucius again. He did sit in his truck for an extra 5 or 6 minutes, trying to look like he was busy on his phone, but actually just doing the day's Wordle. He got it in 6. Whew! When he went to the front door, Lucius answered after the first knock and swung the door open to invite Pete inside. It was a fairly sparse inside, and the house had clearly not been updated in decades, but the furniture was nice, and the art on the walls were cool, and Lucius was there, so, all in all, not a bad space to be in. So, Pete began, as Lucius said, He gestured for Lucius to go first. I made some coffee, if you'd like a cup. I don't really know how to do the whole hosting thing. He laughed self-consciously. Coffee would be good, thanks. I brought a bunch of stuff. It's all in my truck whenever you want to get started. I mean, we can get started. Lucius grimaced a bit. Okay, yeah, coffee, then work, I guess. He poured Pete a cup of coffee and offered hazelnut-flavoured creamer, which Pete initially declined before tasting the bitter mud Lucius had made. Not wanting to be rude, he said he'd changed his mind and poured creamer until the black coffee turned a warmer shade of khaki that nearly matched the wide-legged linen pants Lucius wore. They stood in the kitchen and made small talk, Lucius inquiring about Pete's job with the county, while they sipped from their mugs until Lucius groaned and said they should probably get started. Pete set him up with the hedge trimmers first and instructed him carefully on where to keep his hands while it was running so as to avoid any more unintentional amputations. He opted to take on the job of mowing, a bit more challenging of a task than the hedges, given the thickness of the overgrown grass. Pete dutifully shoved the mower through the mess on the highest length setting just to get it started, collecting the clippings and throwing them in Lucius's green bin, then went back over it on a lower setting to even it all out. Lucius, meanwhile, had done a fairly vicious job of trimming the hedges back, seemingly going for shortness over neatness. That alone had taken them the better part of 2 hours, and Lucius had a lovely tinge of red in his cheeks from his efforts that Pete did his best not to stare at. Pete found himself hoping his own sweaty face wasn't too off-putting. Lucius offered to get them some water and a quick lunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and Pete gratefully accepted, moving on to use the weed whacker to quickly neaten up the edges of the lawn while Lucius prepared their meal. After the short break, he handed Lucius the gloves and a small pair of pruning shears to get started with the ivy climbing the house, taking it upon himself to handle the larger branches of the tree out front and the shrubs growing through the fence. Without the loud droning of the power tools, they could actually talk to each other while they worked, and Pete happily listened to Lucius open up about his job and moody bosses. Apparently, Lucius had been the personal assistant to an exterior decorator, something Pete didn't realise even existed, who had teamed up with the most efficient lawn maintenance company in the area, Blackbeard's Outdoor Maintenance and Lawn Care, to start a brand new, multi-talented business that had been hired by some very high-end customers to design and maintain their outdoor spaces. "Oh my god, I used to work for him, Blackbeard, before I started with the county. I got a lot of old equipment from him." Pete gestured at all the tools he'd brought. "Yeah, well, good thing you left, 'cause that guy is seriously insane," Lucius scoffed. He went on to talk about how his boss and the owner of Blackbeard's had fallen for each other, then split suddenly, leading to Blackbeard's majorly cutting staff to maximise profits. It had been several weeks since then, and word was Blackbeard's employees were being majorly overworked and all on the brink of quitting. Lucius still talked to his old co-workers, Jim and Frenchie. "But you'll never guess who just texted me out of nowhere on Thursday? Fucking Steed, who ditched his boyfriend and business partner, now wants me to get him back in touch with the guy for him. I guess Ed must have blocked him everywhere, so Steed hasn't been able to make contact. Steed's been doing some freelance work with the guys Ed can't and offered to hire me back, which I've obviously accepted for now, even though he can't match my old salary. Ugh, my life is ridiculous." Pete took advantage of the short pause in Lucius's story to ask, "So if you worked for lawn maintenance people too, what happened here? Don't you get trained on how to, mow your grass? Not that I'm judging." "No, babe, I was an executive assistant. Clerical work only for these delicate hands, thank you. I got a discounted rate from the company, so everything was done for me. Hope to God that comes back at some point." They talked all through the afternoon, even as Lucius slowed his momentum and eventually took to sitting on the front steps, chattering as Pete continued to work on the whole Ivy situation alone. Shit was everywhere, which he actually didn't mind much. He liked listening to Lucius, and yeah, alright, his crush was becoming fairly undeniable the longer the day wore on. Hacking away at the godforsaken Ivy was infinitely preferable to saying goodbye and trying to decide if he should ask to see Lucius again. They seemed to get along really well, but maybe Lucius was just the kind of person who could talk to anyone. He thought he saw Lucius eyeing his arms a few times, but maybe he was just admiring the muscle tank Pete had made by tearing the sleeves off of an old t-shirt. It was hard to say. Unfortunately, the day did have to end at some point, and when Pete had exhausted every task he could think of short of repainting the exterior of the house, he had to admit that it was time to say goodbye. Lucius kept him company as he loaded his tools back into the bed of his truck, then leaned against it, looking over the lawn that now practically sparkled. The sun was just about to dip down past their houses across the street, and it had been a very long day, but Pete felt like hardly any time had passed at all. "Thanks for all this," Lucius said quietly. "Really. And thanks for the reality check the other day. I needed it." "No worries. Just glad I could help." Pete paused, trying to think of anything smooth he could say at all. Can I? Lucius smiled and said, "Sorry, go ahead." "So I'm going to have to stop by again on Monday to officially see you've complied with the county ordinance. I guess I'll look forward to seeing you then?" "Yeah, me too." Lucius raised a hand to rest on Pete's shoulder as he leaned in. Pete froze. Yeah, he'd spent all day dreaming about getting to kiss Lucius, but he never really expected it to happen. He was so tired and sweaty. God, he probably smelled awful too, and he was wearing this stupid cut-off t-shirt. His panicking was interrupted by Lucius's lips meeting his cheek. "I'll see you Monday." On Monday afternoon, Lucius's house was once again Pete's last stop for the day, and Pete texted him when he was heading over. He marked off all the infractions as corrected, smirking to himself, then went to knock on the door. It opened before he could even make contact, and a grinning Lucius grabbed 2 handfuls of his yellow safety vest and tugged him inside. The end.
That was Municipal by Mistercrystal. Next up is Throwing Shapes in the Church of Dance by Zuckerbaby_1. This is an Archie Zheng modern AU where Archie is intent on seeing what it takes to get Zheng to have some fun. Let's see what shenanigans they get up to.
Over her adult life, Archie had been on any number of pub crawls. Joyful, messy ones, maudlin, necessary ones. Rarely any boring ones, although that time Archie had tried out office life and gone on the work-mandated pub crawl in name only. Yeah, that had been a mind-numbing, lifeless journey through tacky wine bars and middle managers talking bollocks. But on balance, Archie was a big fan of pub crawls. The drunken rambles, conversationally, physically, between locations, fuzzily keeping track or not of your companions. Definitely Archie's kind of night. Tonight's pub crawl was Lucius's doing, a drinking tour of all the local gay pubs and clubs, all in celebration of Steed's graduating from baby gay to having freaky middle-aged sex with a hot leather daddy gay. An opportunity to bring together the 2 social groups, Steed's friends and Ed's friends, who'd only met en masse a few times, and former... Archie looked back at the group chat invite Lucius had sent just to get the exact wording. And form an ultimate queer superhero group like the Avengers but with less physical violence and property damage. He'd followed that ambitious idea up with one that Archie could relate to a bit more. Let's smash everyone together and see what sort of fun we can have. Archie had known Ed for a few years, at first working with him at his restaurant, and then following him to launch his food truck when he handed the restaurant's reins over to Izzy. Archie had initially stuck around because of Jim, to be honest. She had found them incredibly hot, and interestingly mysterious, and, most fascinating of all, weirdly hopeful. It was cute. Archie had wondered how that much dark brooding could mix with that much sparkly hope. And then after a while realised that everyone who worked with Ed seemed to have the same vibe to a greater or lesser degree. That degree had gotten much greater after Ed started dating Steed, and he turned from a surly but occasionally friendly, deeply talented bastard to an incredibly smiley and obviously smitten kitten. Still a deeply talented bastard, so apparently Steed hadn't managed to change that about him. It had been a bit of a whiplash, to be honest, seeing him change so fast, practically overnight, but it did make the kitchens much more chill places to work. All of the staff started letting down their guard and revealing their vulnerable underbellies, the way Archie's snake Arabella liked to do when she wanted to scratch. Fang was a fucking softie. Ivan didn't talk much, but gave off big cuddly fucker vibes. Fuck, even Izzy, angry little bastard that he could be, turned out to do fucking drag on his nights off. Had a voice like a fucking angel. And that had been fun. Great to watch him perform. But everything in Archie's brain had melted away when Jim stalked onto stage as a drag king and transformed the room with their performance. Transcendent. Incandescent. Fucking hot as shit. Really cemented the way Archie felt about Jim. That she fancied the ever-loving fuck out of them. And that kind of sucked, really, because at one of the earlier shindigs, Jim had met Olawande and Zheng, and it seemed like they'd formed a cuddly little threesome. Archie could just about understand Olawande's appeal. He was gorgeous, for a start. Warm and soft and supportive, a smile like a rising sun. But Zheng... Archie didn't really get the Zheng thing. Yes, Zheng was objectively absolutely fucking gorgeous, all giant ponytails and delicately boned hands and such an air of authority Archie found herself acting out just to get Zheng to tell her off. And yeah, she was intelligent and articulate, and her sense of humour was sly and biting, jokes slipping right under your ribs, and you didn't realise how funny they'd been until those same ribs were aching from laughing. But most of the time she was so standoffish and serious, and Archie wanted to know if she actually knew how to have fun. Proper fun. chaotic shots in random bars, boasting to your grandkids, embarrassing CCTV stills, kind of fun. Archie thought that Jim needed that sort of fun in their life and really couldn't imagine either Oluwande or Zheng bringing the chaos in the way that it needed to be brought. Archie could. And Archie was interested in finding out if 3 could become 4, but had no idea how to broach the subject. She thought of maybe asking about it tonight at this ridiculous pub crawl shindig of Lucius's, but then Archie and Zheng hadn't been able to join the rest of the attendees in the second bar they'd gone to, a little underground place that could only allow 40 people on the premises, including staff. Archie and Zheng had been at the end of the line, Zheng whispering something in Oluwande's ear, and Archie deep in conversation with Jim, who were both just ahead of them. When Archie and Zheng had gotten to the entryway, it was just in time to see the bouncer finish counting the group through, including Oluwande and Jim. Bouncer put his hands up in front of Archie and Zheng, and that was it. No entry, and the rest of the group hadn't been willing to leave. Something about half-price cocktails and a waiting list and whatever the fuck. So here they were, Archie and Zheng, standing on the footpath outside the venue and trying to figure out what the fuck to do. They could go and wait for everyone at the next venue. Lucius had shared the list, but that was fucking boring as far as Archie was concerned. They could have an adventure instead, get to know each other. Archie could see how Zheng reacted in the face of actual unplanned fun, and maybe get some intel on the whole threesome situation. Not sure I want to hang out at the Golden Frog for however long it takes them to finish up here. You got any ideas or anything you'd like to do? Archie asked, flicking a quick glance at Zheng's profile. She was staring fixedly at the bouncer, watching him suspiciously, though that suspicion bled out of her face with every person that the bouncer turned away. Zheng turned to Archie eventually and sighed in a way that made Archie immediately think about every time she'd been a disappointment to the people in her life. She shook it off and poked Zheng in the arm, asked the question again, and Zheng actually answered this time. If we're not going to wait for them at the next pub, well, we could always go see this play I've heard about. Very hip playwright. It even has a swear word in the title. Zheng looked at Archie with a tiny shit-eating smile in her eyes that Archie recognised, the one that indicated that she was telling a joke. Archie thought that sounded like a fucking awful plan, but indicated for Zheng to continue. Zheng quirked an eyebrow and resumed speaking. Then we could go to a swinging coffee house and discuss the play before retiring to a jazz bar to listen to xylophone music and talk about life. She took in the look on Archie's face and sighed again. Fine, what do you want to do? Right, Archie had the best plan. Always had the best plans because they weren't all planned out. They were always multiple awesome ideas stacked on top of each other in a plain coloured overcoat. Okay, so we're going to head to the nearest bog standard indie bar. I've got a fatty boom batty in my pocket and we could smoke it on the way so that we're munted by the time we order our first drink. Stay there for a few drinks, laugh like a couple of twats, then we could relocate to a posh fucker pub, preferably with an eclectic jukebox, and see how many of the posh fuckers we can roll up before we get kicked out. Zheng shuddered and wrinkled her nose and, okay, fine, that was kind of cute, but she obviously didn't know how to have fun. Zheng said snottily, I like my idea better. Archie snorted. You would. It's more interesting. In what fucking world? It's all pretentious and artsy-fartsy. How is that interesting? Fine, whatever. Toss a coin? Archie had dragged Zheng through the crowd at the first really grungy pub they'd found, both of them a little worse for wear from the joint they'd shared as they walked towards the suburb of grungy pubs. They were waiting for the bartender to notice them, and Archie watched Zheng run her finger along the bar and frown at whatever it was that had stuck to it. Stupid thing to do in this sort of pub, but if she hadn't learned that lesson yet, she was going to learn it tonight. The bartender finally leaned in to take their order, and Archie pitched her voice to cut through the sound of the shitty live band that was playing shitty live covers of 90s grunge music. 2 pints of cider. Zheng leaned in and yelled in Archie's ear. And chips. Chips as well, Archie told the bartender. 2 packets. 2 packets, Archie dutifully relayed. And nuts. Honey roasted. Archie whipped her head around to glare at Zheng. I'm ordering the drinks, and now I can't remember what I was going to say. Fuck it. Zheng leaned over the bar and grabbed the confused bartender by the front of their shirt before Archie could stop her. 2 ciders, 2 packets of chips, 2 packets of honey roasted nuts, and 2 tequila slammers, please. After she let the bartender go, Zheng beelined for a table off in the back corner of the pub, leaving Archie to pay. Normally, Archie would have the shits with the high-powered fucking corporate whatever she did for a job, leaving the person on hospo rages to pay their order, but she was too impressed with the crack in Zheng's usual demeanour to be pissed about it. They were 1 joint, 4 tequila slammers, and 2 ciders into their adventure, and Archie was having way more fun than she had really expected to have. Zheng was loose and relaxed, her words not yet slurred, but getting close. She was smiling and laughing, flicking her ponytails around, silky black hair flying through the air and occasionally whacking Archie in the face. Archie was beginning to see what Jim and Olawande saw in Zheng, as she slowly unveiled an uninhibited charm. I think I put people off, Zheng was saying, an earnest and concerned expression in her face. Archie took a sip of her second pint of cider and considered the statement. I mean, I can see how that could happen, but, I don't think you do. Not really. Zheng nodded emphatically. Yes, I do. Look, pull my finger. Archie blinked warily at the forefinger that Zheng had extended towards her. Yeah, nah, mate, not going to be doing that. But, that doesn't put me off. Kind of endears you to me a bit more, I gotta say. I once almost drowned when I tried to do a roll in a kayak. That sounds pretty intense, mate. More nodding from Zheng before she tapped the side of her nose and whispered conspiratorially. Not surprising, really. I'd put too many pebbles in my rucksack. The craft sat so low in the water. So low. And they weren't going to be doing the whole Mordelin thing. At least not this early in the night. Time to get Zheng out of her head. Get her to stop thinking about random memories. Hey, you still want to go to that fucking play of yours? Turns out, rushing the stage during a soliloquy, even when that soliloquy was entirely made up of the word fuck, was frowned upon in polite play-glowing society. Fucking funny, though. And fun. As they huddled together, laughing and wheezing, next to the stage door out of which they'd just been ejected, Zheng asked Archie, You ever stolen a traffic cone? When Archie nodded, Zheng followed up with, So just how do we go about doing that? Finding roadworks that were underway and used traffic cones was, unsurprisingly, not that difficult. Archie explained the approach. Run like fuck towards the traffic cone you want, scoop it up, and then run the fuck away. And Zheng grasped it brilliantly. Holding their bright orange prizes aloft, they both cackled as they sprinted away from the thankfully distant yells of the poor bastards who were pouring bitumen on a Saturday night. Once the voices had faded completely away and they had slowed to a brisk walk, Archie let out a crowing ululation for good measure and was delighted when Zheng threw her head back and howled. It had been impossible to find a pub that would let them in, what with both of them carrying obviously stolen orange traffic cones and acting like they weren't doing any such thing. Archie was about to suggest that they ditch the bloody things, having succeeded at the actual stealing, when a group of people swept them up and deposited them at a house party. It was just around the corner from the last pub they tried to get into, and they were greeted like conquering heroes by rooms full of people that they didn't know, purely because of the traffic cones. When they'd made their way out into the backyard, joining various people around a brazier holding a really crappily built fire, some dude handed them a bottle of Jägermeister before he stumbled out the back gate. It was about 2/3 full and tasted just as bad as it had every other time Archie had found herself drinking it. Worse, though, because it was warm. They still drank another third of it because you never wasted free booze. The fire burned down as they handed the bottle to each other, and by the time it got to Coles, they felt buoyed enough to move on. They left the traffic cones behind as a gift for whoever lived in the house, and then ducked out the back gate. Next stop was at a jazz club, where Archie discovered both that Zheng knew how to play a piano and that bouncers at jazz bars were as persistent as any she'd encountered at the scuzziest of pubs. After another forced ejection, they found their way to one of those bars populated by posh fuckers and people who wanted to fuck posh fuckers. Archie led Zheng on a game of wind up a finance, bro, which mostly involved laughing when someone said they were working in finance and then asking, no, seriously, what do you actually do? Do you have like a real job? They managed to seriously wind up about 5 finance bros until one of them tried to lay a hand on Archie. But before she could kick him in the balls, simple, classic, got the job done, Zheng unleashed hell on him. Hell in the form of amazing kicks and spins, and Archie watched the blur of limbs with her mouth open. At least until bouncers started bearing down on them, and Archie got a chance to deploy her simpler approach. Archie felt the need to provide her review as they were both dragged out of the soulless, black-walled, black glass-topped tables, polished concrete floor-having bar. Executive fucking realness, she yelled. Fucking boring as shit. Zheng, however, got the last word. Your jukebox doesn't even have an eclectic mix of tunes. They actually found another little jazz bar that was still open, and thank fuck it sold coffee. The alcohol pumping through their systems was making both of them sluggish and tired, and the coffee was a great idea to help them get back on track. Zheng had been, bizarrely, correct about the xylophone music, and even as far away from the stage as they'd sat, they couldn't escape it. Wasn't too bad, really. Better than the grunge covers. Archie had expected the coffee to close Zheng's mouth, where previously the dope and alcohol had loosened it, but it seemed like the floodgates had truly been opened. They shared stories of their childhoods so incredibly different. Archie's mum and her snake breeding enterprise and one too many trips to the emergency department with snake bites. Zheng's auntie and her rigid rules and insistence on politeness and protocols, and all of the lessons that had made up Zheng's day from a very young age. Deportment, piano, maths. Their favourite sweets and the best ever albums, happiest birthday and saddest moments. How they'd felt separate, different, and absolutely desperate to be anyone but who they were being shaped into. They talked about the way they'd escaped those childhoods, even momentarily, the dreams they'd had, from the nonsensical. I wanted to be monkey, Zheng said, jumping up on a chair and making a strange whooshing noise with her mouth, to the completely sensical. I was going to be Elvis, Archie declared, joining Zheng in standing on her chair and providing a scintillating rendition of Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear. Any jazz club that willingly gave a xylophone the run of the stage obviously had no time for musical genius, Archie thought, as they were politely informed that they had to leave. And now it was closing in on 2 a.m, and they were standing on a street corner, Archie's arm around Zheng's waist, Zheng's arm flung across Archie's shoulders. They were looking at the messages that they'd both been ignoring to this point and laughing about how they got increasingly incoherent and worried the later the night had gone on. And then they checked out all of the photos that had been dumped into their respective group chats, oohing and ahhing and shoving their phones at each other when there was a particularly juicy photo. Lucius and Fang, Archie just about squealed, before Zheng revealed a photo of Ed and Steve that was almost, but not entirely, in flagrante delicto. Get a room! They chorused and giggled helplessly as a couple walking past them looked taken aback by their shared chat. And then they both pulled up a photo of Jim and Olawande, and before she could help it, Archie sighed longingly. She should probably stop herself from what she wanted to say, but... fuck it. Fuck. Jim is so fucking... Jim. You and Olawande are so lucky. Zheng gave Archie's shoulders a squeeze before Archie could spiral about her still drunk mouth having said too much, and said, proud and fond, yeah, we really are. And then Zheng pulled up her phone into classic selfie stance and bumped her head gently against Archie's. Hey, she said, and Archie felt suddenly very self-conscious, very seen, very put on the fucking spot. Yeah? I reckon Jim and Olawande would feel lucky to know you too. I know I feel lucky right now. As in, you want to get lucky? Archie threw in an eyebrow waggle, just for the hell of it. Zheng looked at Archie, face serious. Maybe, though not tonight. Archie filed that away and reckoned she hid her disappointment pretty well. And then Zheng gently bumped their heads again, and maybe not. We'd have to have a meeting about it, but what I meant was, I'm lucky that we got to hang out like this. We should do it again. You and me, yeah, but all four of us, and soon. Archie's mouth felt dry, but she managed to say, like, ultra casually, yeah, okay, sounds cool. Could totally do that. But before that, said Zheng, arms still crooked above their heads, phone in hand, let's show 'em how good our night's been. And before Archie knew what was happening, Zheng had planted a big fuck-off kiss on her cheek and then turned it into a raspberry. The flash of the camera went off right at the point that they were both creased with laughter, their faces pressed together, their arms wrapped around each other. Best pub crawl of Archie's life. Fucking ever. Hands down.
That was Throwing Shapes in the Church of Dance by Zuckerbaby1. And before that was Municipal by mistercrystal. Both were read by Gutis, aka Cheesecake3. Head to the links in the show notes to give them all a comment and a kudos and tell them how much you enjoyed their work. By the way, you can record your own narrations for this show. All you have to do is get the author's permission first, then record a fic. Any length is fine. Then send the audio file to ourflagmeansfanfiction@gmail.com. Everyone who wants to send something in will have their work up on the podcast. And you can find us on Instagram at ourflagmeansfanfiction. And be sure, by the way, to show the world that there still is an audience for Our Flag related content. Give us a rating and a review and tell your friends how much you enjoy this podcast. Maybe post about it on social media. However you want to show your love, we will appreciate it. Until next time, do creations, be cringe, commit crime. Bye!